well. But just a little background on myself. So I'm an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of North Florida here in Jacksonville. I'm also the poetry editor for Agni, which is the flagship literary magazine at Boston University, and I've been there for about 6 years. I have about over a decade of experience in literary publishing. So I've also judged a number of different poetry contests, including for Trio House, for Boa Editions, and for Tupelo Quarterly, all small press poetry publishers. And I'm also an author. I think that goes without saying, but I've published two full-length books of poetry as well as five poetry chapbooks. So poetry is my love. And I love sharing it with people. And I'm delighted to share this time with you. So, in addition to working through the contemporary Aubade today, which is one of my absolute favorite forms, I'm going to save a little time at the end of this session that we have with each other for any questions that you might have in terms of publishing or poetry writ large, or breaking into publishing, or even teaching poetry. I would be happy to answer any questions. So if those pop up for you, just know that there's going to be, about 10 minutes at the end for those questions. Since we have, a nice group that's not too big, I'd love to get a little bit of introductions in terms of you, your approach to poetry, how long you've been doing it, your interest in it, and what brought you here. So let's just start with Patrick.
Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Can you hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I'm Patrick. I currently am in Louisiana. I teach at a university called University of Louisiana Monroe. And I've always sort of since I was like an undergrad written poetry, just a and it's kind of I do it more as like a sort of exercise, like I just I don't know, I find it kind of meditative and I never actually really thought about publishing it until I went to Jessica's workshop last year. And so I
Great.
been thinking more about that
Awesome.
lately. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Deborah Grayson, hello. Who are you? Tell us about
Hello.
yourself.
I am a person who has been involved with poetry since I've been breathing. I am a registered poetry therapist
Oh,
and
beautiful.
expressive arts specialist in practice for close to 47 years.
Wonderful.
And I use poetry daily as my life support system. And I'm
Great.
doing the Stafford Challenge, which is writing a poem a day for a year.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So
Oh,
that's always
that's
fun. And I'm also a professor, also published
that's a
author.
breakneck speed. Any tips for that? That's incredible.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Yeah, just remove the blocks and forget the I can'ts and just purge on
Right.
the page. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks for being here. And is it Chele? Chele?
It's Shell.
Shell.
Um, I guess I've been writing since I was a teenager, and hopefully I've improved because you can imagine. Um,
Yeah.
I'm I'm 61. I've got one poem published in a
Great.
literary magazine that's pretty local, and I'm starting to take it more seriously. Mostly I'm a painter, but
Wonderful.
yeah, and I love Jack's Poetry Fest. It's wonderful, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you for being here, Shell. And is it Yan Shan? Shan Shan? Yan?
Yan Shan. So I've been writing seriously for a year. I think
Okay.
it was really interesting because I thought, oh, I did it in college, and then last year I did the Jack's Poetry Fest,
Right.
and I thought, oh, I can really get into this. So I've been working on a book, and I just recently took a manuscript course in Los Angeles in this place
Great.
called Beyond Baroque, which is a poetry organization. I've been published a few times, and I recently got rejected from Agni.
No. Congratulations.
Yeah. So, um,
And my apologies.
no,
But
it's
yeah.
okay. I'm just happen, part of the process.
Yes.
So that's me. I'm
Yes.
from Hong Kong. That's sort of
Oh,
a
wonderful.
part.
Thank you
Yeah.
for being here. And just FYI, like that's I say this with a lot of love because, some people aren't aware of our numbers, but like we accept less than 1%. We
Right,
accept less than
right.
1%. So just keep trying us. Yan, but thanks for trying us that time.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great. Thank you.
Alma?
Hi, I'm
Hey,
Alma from the west coast of Canada,
beautiful.
and I've been journaling for over 60 years now, since I was 8 years old. And poetry sometimes just seems to write itself on the page.
Right.
Don't try to submit or anything like that, but I'm in the second year of the Stafford Challenge, and although
So
I don't
great.
write poems every day, but so if you do that, Jessica, I'm impressed. But I would
I
say that
don't.
maybe 5 times a week. So it really has increased and it's really fun.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Alma. And last but not least, we're coming in hot with Nicole Zwolinski, who I know is about to publish her book, a local poet here. Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself? I know you just walked in, but
Yeah, thank
thank you for
you.
being
Sorry, I
here.
was wrestling with Zoom. Um, yeah, I have a book coming out, a poetry collection on poems on being a mother. It's going to be published on in August, and it goes on pre-sale next week.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here,
Yeah.
Nicole. So we're going to jump into it. If I could go back to the slides. So I'd love to think about the relationship, the kind of bridging conceit that I want to think about in context to the Aubade form is poetry's relationship with time. So I'd love to ask you a question, a series of questions before we sort of look at a contemporary example of the Aubade. We're going to digest it together, and then I'm going to lead us into a poetry writing exercise that sort of dovetails with what the Aubade is doing. But before we do that, what do you think poetry can do with time? Or what is the relationship between time and poetry? And you can feel free to jump in on the chat or just respond in the moment. What do we think?
It
Relationship between
suspends time.
what was that?
Poetry suspends time.
I love that. Yes, suspends time. Anybody else? Patrick, I think you were about to say something.
I was just gonna say like something similar. I was gonna say crystallizing time, like saying like I think of it as like something that's kind of yeah, it stops
Right.
time in a way, and it's aligned with memory, right? Poetry and memory.
Yes. Poetry and memory blurring time as well, right, Nicole? So I want us to think about that in context to the different forms of poetry that sort of are hand in hand with time. But you've all kind of mentioned these crystallizing moments, but also these expansions, these ways of challenging time. And Patrick, you mentioned memory, right? Time and how we conceive of time personally is almost always hand in hand with memory. And the neat thing about poetry for me, for this author, is that it doesn't always have to follow a linear path, right? So much like our personal memories, whether these memories again be happy and joyous or whether they be painful, typically it doesn't follow a path that is linear. So the interesting thing for me about poetry, as opposed to different genres of writing, of creative writing, is that I can almost more accurately portray that emotional tenor of a specific moment, right? And for what? For multiple reasons, but for me at least, for that understanding and connection between people. But I want you to keep thinking about that as we work through this poem together, but also as we work towards creating our own work in the Aubade form. So if we go to the next slide, is this slide being shared? I can't even see it.
It is.
Oh, okay, great. Um, what are some forms? Oh, I can see it now. What are some forms of poetry that you associate with time? Like any forms you can think of. Of course, there's the Aubade form, which I'll talk about in a bit, but any other ones that you can think of in terms of form?
Would songs count?
Sure, songs, absolutely. Anything else you can think of?
I'm gonna say occasional.
Yes, absolutely. The occasional poem. If we go to the next slide, so some that we all be thinking about. You mentioned the occasional. So on the occasion of an election, typically there is, for example, an occasional poem that is written specifically for that moment. So these kind of historical moments that are punctuated by poetry. So that's very ceremonial, right? But it also kind of commemorates the specific moment in time. We're going to be looking at the Aubade form, which is a poem specifically about the dawn and the relationship with all of the different connotations and associations that we have that we carry with the dawn. And then there's also the nocturne, which I love that you mentioned song because the nocturne has a link to the nocturne in music, right? We think of Chopin, we think of composers that have composed the nocturne or not night music that is specifically kind of within the more connotations of the night, which equals, meditation, but also spirituality, contemplation, interiority, a very different mood and a very different mode of writing than say the Aubade. But I wanted to give you some other um, different forms just in case this activates something in you and you kind of want to pursue more relationships between poetry and time. So those are just two other ones that I invite you to sort of look into if this interests you after this session together. So if we go on to the next slide, we're going to be focusing on the Aubade. So I'd love you to just take a moment to write. What do you typically associate with the morning? So this could be a feeling, this could be images, this could be a range of emotions. Maybe think about the morning that you had today. And then I also want you to write down 3 song titles that are meaningful to the type of morning that you had today. Maybe it was hectic, right? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe you had a chill morning, you were off from work. Maybe, it was more contemplative with the weather. I don't know where you all are, but the weather here has been pretty dismal. So let's just spend about 3 minutes writing in response to that first question, and then writing those 3 song titles. 3 minutes. Okay, let's try to wrap that up in the next 30 seconds. Okay. So typical associations with the morning. What did you all come up with?
To the morning, Dan Fogelberg.
Hmm. Love that. Thank you. Anyone else?
I thought of Manic Monday because I'm not a morning person.
That's such a morning song. Absolutely. Manic Monday. Anyone else?
So I had jotted down coffee, chaos, mental list, wrangling cats because it feels like as I'm trying to get my children prepared to go out the door, it feels like wrangling cats. And the one
Yeah.
song that really stuck with me was the Tchaikovsky's Trepak dance, the Russian dance, where it's, the fast pace whirlwind.
Yeah,
That's my morning.
absolutely. So I'm getting mania. I'm putting this in the chat. Fast pace, multitasking,
Mhm.
right? Anything else you can think of? And feel free to add. Shell, thank you for that. Bird song. Yes, it doesn't always have to be about duty and obligation, right? The bird song, the heralding of a new day, of a new opportunity. So the Aubade it's a very old form of poetry. It's European instances, and so it's funny to think about this like long lineage of poets that have been just thinking about the sun and the dawn and what that means. And a lot of it has to do with some of these associations that we've brought up just in our brainstorming. So it comes from the French word, which actually typically means dawn serenade. So again, we're back to music. Um, and it's funny because if you think about the trajectory of the Aubade in poetry, it is also very linked to this attention to relationships. So one of the more canonical instances of the Aubade form is John Donne's "The Sun Rising," and we can go to the next slide, please. So if we think about it as a definition, it's a poem or song that greets the morning while lamenting the end of night, often concerning the parting of lovers. So earliest uses derived from the 12th century, but this canonical example of the Aubade comes to us. I believe it was published in 1633. And this is a very metaphysical poem, and I put the link information down there as well, but you can look this up. We're not going to spend too much time because I want to move rather quickly to the contemporary example. But I think understanding just a cursory view of how typically or traditionally the Aubade form has been used is really interesting, actually, in thinking about how this contemporary poet uses and challenges and expands the use of the Aubade form. So but just as an overview of The Sun Rising, which is the name of this more canonical Aubade form by John Donne, it's a metaphysical poem where the speaker almost scolds the sun. It's very, it's of course it's 1633, so the language is very antiquated, but it's a great read. So the speaker is almost scolding the sun for interrupting his time, his kind of tryst with his lover, and claiming that their love kind of makes the bedroom, the center of the universe that supersedes time, that supersedes duties, that supersedes, you know, job stuff, things that that person has to do in order to get through their day. And it's sort of this lamentation of the cessation of this kind of, this lover's tryst that defies time and obligation and duty. So it's really lovely in that sense. I invite you to give it a read, maybe after we go through this contemporary example. But what's interesting about it is this attention to time, of course, but also this attention to love's relationship to time and how challenging and estranging it can be for this usual relationship with time, which is segmented, which is regimented, which is tied to labor. So it's this kind of use of the Aubade form, this lamentation of the dawn that almost transcends time and space. So, with that all being said, I'd love us to turn to a more contemporary version of the Aubade. So, you'll find in the chat there's a link to the poem that I'd love us to think about and maybe talk a little bit about before we get into our own writing. So, this is Ocean Vuong's Aubade with Burning City, and we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And if you look, there's the link in the chat. You can pull it up on your own computer as well. So this is a really lovely and challenging and interesting version of an Aubade. So just a little bit of context for this more recently published poem. So this is published by Ocean Vuong, who was born in 1988. He's a pretty critically acclaimed Vietnamese American poet and novelist and professor. He writes a lot about like desire and refugee trauma and war and familial love. And he's most known for his first collection was Night Sky with Exit Wounds, which has a lot to do with the kind of Vietnamese refugee experience, but also about family love, desire, and then also his novel On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. He's pretty well known for that as well. So this example, I'd love us to pull this up in thinking about how a contemporary poet revisits the Aubade and possibly expands its possibilities. So I'd love us also to just maybe think about how he reads this too. So I'm going to read, or I'm going to play out his reading of it. And hopefully you can hear that okay. So 1 second. I'm just pulling it up now.
Aubade with Burning City.
Can everyone hear that okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Great.
Milk flower petals on the street, like pieces of a girl's dress. May your days be merry and bright. He fills a teacup with champagne, brings it to her lips. Open, he says. She opens. Outside, a soldier spits out his cigarette as footsteps fill the square like stones fallen from the sky. May all your Christmases be white as the traffic guard unstraps his holster, his hand running the hem of her white dress, his black eyes, her black hair, a single candle, their shadows, 2 wicks. A military truck speeds through the intersection, the sound of children shrieking inside. A bicycle hurled through a store window. When the dust rises, a black dog lies in the road, panting, its hind legs crushed into the shine of a white Christmas. On the nightstand, a sprig of magnolia expands like a secret heard for the first time. The treetops glisten and children listen. The chief of police face down in a pool of Coca-Cola. A palm-sized photo of his father soaking beside his left ear. The song moving through the city like a widow, a white, I'm dreaming of a curtain of snow falling from her shoulders. Snow crackling against the window, snow shredded with gunfire, red sky, snow on the tanks rolling over the city walls, a helicopter lifting the living just out of reach, the city so white it is ready for ink. The radio saying run, run, run. Milk flower petals on a black dog, like pieces of a girl's dress. May your days be merry and bright. She is saying something neither of them can hear. The hotel rocks beneath them, the bed a field of ice cracking. Don't worry, he says, as the first bomb brightens their faces. My brothers have won the war, and tomorrow the lights go out. I'm dreaming. I'm dreaming to hear sleigh bells in the snow. In the square below, a nun on fire runs silently toward her God. Open, he says. She opens.
Okay. Initial impressions, thoughts. Has anyone encountered this poem before? Patrick, what do you think?
The thing that strikes me is that I like how I wouldn't associate with an you said Aubade.
Aubade, yeah,
If it wasn't for the title, right? The title is the thing that kind of gives it
right.
that resonance. Like and so like say it's not an obviously not Aubade. And
Absolutely.
I think I've been mispronouncing Aubade for the my entire life. But and yeah, so I find that striking. I like how like it's really disorienting, and I don't realize like where like the couple are until the very end in the hotel room.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other impressions? Thank you, Patrick.
The sorry, the peacefulness of a snowfall with the distress of war,
Right.
really striking.
Mm-hmm. And a snowfall implied too in a tropical place,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the snowfall being perhaps something more akin to ash
Mm-hmm.
or the destructive scene that we see, right? And just the context that is provided. And he didn't read it, but the context behind this poem is in the epigraph that you can see prior to the poem starting. South Vietnam, 1975. Armed Forces Radio played Irving Berlin's White Christmas as a code to begin Operation Frequent Wind, the ultimate evacuation of American civilians and Vietnamese refugees by helicopter during the fall of Saigon. And at this point, you can see if you looked into this on in the internet, like there's even images of this moment, right? Of kind of like a sheer panic in the moment of only a select number of people first knowing about this evacuation and then more people knowing. And then again, it incites this sheer panic, right? Because those who have been, say, working with the American forces, like they're now in imminent danger. It's a complete upset, right? In terms of the paradigmatic order of the time. So, and at the time, people, mentioned um, there was just complete chaos in the streets. People were leaving their belongings, just trying to get out as fast as they can because they felt in danger, right? In terms of the imminent invasion and the fall of Saigon. So, in thinking about that, it's so interesting to think also in context to this poem as it relates not only maybe to the literal soldier and the implied lover. Again, it's poetry. We only get this in vignettes, right? And I like to digest that, but also this relationship between two countries, right? A very vexed relationship, a very complicated relationship, and one that a part of their relationship is now ending, right? And to think about that in context to the Aubade poem and the Aubade form, which is all about a lamentation of an end or a cessation of a relationship, that's doing a completely different thing, right? I was going to break you out into some groups because sometimes I feel like it's a little more comfortable to talk to maybe two or three people. But I want to give you some questions to think about directly in context to this poem. So if we scroll down to the next slide, please. First images, words, what you notice in the poem, we can handle that as a group. But I also want you, when I break you out into these really small groups, I want you to think about these other questions. I love when I teach my poetry classes. Some things I love about poetry is that I think that some of the best poems and some of the best poets, they provide more questions than they do answers, right? Like if a poem has too many answers, it's probably a little bit too one note, right? Or it's a little bit too simple or straightforward. And I think that this poem, as an example of an interesting poem, it asks more questions than I think it does provide us answers. So I would love you to think about that in that context. I think this is really helpful in terms of crafting your own poems. But what interesting questions do you think this poem asks? So not what is this about, not what do you think the argument is, not, what's the narrative, what questions is it asking for us, which I feel like hurts your brain a little bit, but I think that's what gets to the complexity of what's going on in this poem. Also, what's the effect of using these song lyrics throughout this poem? Like what's the point of that? I think there's a lot of cultural discordance in this poem, so that might be related to that question. And then thinking about this in context too, and we've already kind of arrived at this question, but why update the Aubade form for the context of war? So not only thinking about the relationship between two people, but also two nations. So I'm going to break you out into some, and you can just maybe write down one or two of those questions that you'd like to hit, because you might not be able to see them when I break you out. I actually don't see the breakout room.
I see it on my end.
Oh, you do? Would you
Yeah.
mind putting people into groups of 3 or 2 or 4? So when you go into these rooms, I'm just going to give you about 6 minutes or so to talk it out because I'd like us to regroup, talk a little bit more, and then get into our own writing. So it's not going to be for very long, but I'd love you to just kind of bounce off some ideas before joining back up.
Okay, ready?
Okay. So hopefully that was fruitful just in terms of the questions that I posed for you. So I guess let's start with the hardest question, might as well. What questions do you think that this poem is asking us as readers, as audiences? You might not have gotten to that one, but now you have to answer it just in the spot, digesting what you thought of in your groups.
What will you do when disaster strikes?
Yeah, I love that. What will you do, right? What will you do in chaos? What will you do in disorder? What will you do when the paradigm shifts? Any other questions you can think of that it's asking us as poets, as audiences? I know it's kind of a tricky question, but I think it's an important one.
Maybe something about who's responsible.
Who is responsible? Absolutely. Like, right, who is responsible for this disaster, right? So not only like what are you going to do, but who had the authority or who had the advantage or who and I did jump into one of the break rooms and it was Yan, you brought up an interesting point, like of just, how much language in this poem has to do with really troubled images of that have to do with consent, that have to do with harm and violence, and the undertone of that with like in terms of the relationship between not only people in this poem, but the implication of nations, right? So in thinking about, what you've digested, and the use of this kind of popular Christmas song, how does this update the Aubade form in the context of war? And like why? Why use this form? That is typically so I guess lamenting, but almost more tongue-in-cheek in some senses, right? But why use it to describe this moment?
Current language creates connection and a kind of resonance, I feel.
Right. Right, absolutely. Anybody want to build off of that?
Well, I was thinking that it was a morning song. Like that event happened in the morning, and it was very
Hmm.
clever to choose an Aubade, like to write an
Right,
Aubade. Like I feel
right,
like he was thinking of the moment and then using that to describe with especially with his context, right? So we all
right.
bring into our history and story. So an Aubade from a Vietnamese refugee this would be a very important moment in his life. That moment.
Absolutely. And I mean, think about it, right? In terms of a dawn, a conceptual dawn, the breaking of an extremely long night. Like, what better metaphor can you use to the end of war? Even if it is vexed, even if it is chaotic and painful, right? But it's so interesting to update that use of the Aubade and this kind of connotation of the mourning. And I mean that in a double context, morning and mourning, of this moment of ending, of separation, right? That is just sort of looking at this aftermath of a complicated relationship and just being like, wow, what happened there, you know? And I think that's a lot of what this poem is sort of asking us is how to make sense. And I think about what we talked about in the beginning of this session, how to make sense of memory and historical memory and collective pain and how to hold it and how to remember it. I want us to get through to the next slide, please. And I want us to move towards our own writing because I'd love us to digest this in context to what we started with in the beginning of this session. So maybe take one of the songs that you wrote down in the beginning, but I don't want you to start or end the poem with the lyrics. That's too easy. And I also want you to end your poem with an image of the dawn without using these words. So no sunrise, no sleep, no light, no morning, no time, day, dawn, or wake, and no using the word sun or rise. So these are the challenges. I want you to write in Aubade. Okay, so I need you to incorporate any lyrics you can remember from one of the songs. And I want you to resist ending the poem or starting the poem with the lyrics. And then also your further constraint is to try to evoke the dawn in ways that are perhaps unconventional or unexpected. I'm going to give you only about 6 minutes. So begin. Just about 3 more minutes. Take the next minute or so to write towards the end of a line. It doesn't have to be the end of a poem, but just towards the end of the line so you can pick it back up. Okay, how'd that go?
Hard. I kept putting sunrise, morning, light, like these words just kept coming up.
I know that was probably a frustrating constraint.
I love that
Absolutely.
deeper dive though. Once I
Yeah.
finished arguing with it.
Good. That's how it always starts on the page. Does anybody want to share like a line or two? It doesn't have to be the whole thing if you don't want, but I'd love to hear what you came up with.
I don't mind reading if it's,
Beautiful.
yeah, it's short.
Go for it.
I'm gonna try. Early pop-ups from distant dreams, bird song echoes in the ears as crickets grow quiet. Watching the sun, watching it come up over the rooftops. Dismay at delaying wants for the necessary, arguing with logic. There is really
Hmm.
no way to say no to the morning. Footsteps land clunkily on wooden floors to a door newly opened for the freshness of whatever happens next.
Oof. Okay, not bad for 6 minutes.
Yeah, well, you know,
Incredible. That
I
was
was just looking at
wonderful.
the don'ts. I was looking at the
Well,
nope, nope.
I feel like also your poem really arguing with logic. That's yeah, that was the stakes of the poem for me. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I can
Again,
read
a
one
line?
line.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
The clock face red, insisting that minutes
Oof.
do not stop, even if I want to sleep. I insist on sleeping a little longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep it going, Anne. That's a good start. Anyone else?
I can
Nicole.
read. I just mainly got a bunch of fragments at this point, but the ending was cotton candy bursts and catches me in the act of detachment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I have one line I want to share.
Thank
My
you.
opening line was babies grow in dog years, but I never heard one bark.
Hmm.
And so I chose the wrong song. Like I mentioned my
I feel
son
like that's
singing in the
like a
morning.
title of a poem, Patrick. That's a title, and now you have to write the whole thing. Um, anyone else? Okay. Uh, something I want you to think about after this ends is what we began with. How do poems try to stop time or expand time or challenge time? One way that I consider it an interesting relationship to have with time is it's the way that poetry can kind of serve as a momentary click of a lens or a moment into examination. Another is by preserving that instant over the course of years, right? Over the course of time and space. And I want to leave you with this quote from Ocean Vuong, the poet that we analyzed. Quote, I want to love more than death can harm. And I want to tell you this often, that despite being so human and so terrified here, standing on this unfinished staircase to nowhere and everywhere, surrounded by the cold and starless night, we can live, and we will. If you just go to the last slide for me, I have an unofficial assignment for you tomorrow morning. I want you to write a poem about the last morning you will spend on Earth. That's my unofficial homework for you. And also, I've listed some examples if you're interested, if this sparked some interest in chasing down the Aubade form, which I really encourage you to do. It's a beautiful form. I've written into it myself. These are some beautiful examples that I invite you to read on your own and expand your journey with the Aubade. I did say I would leave a little bit of time for questions. So we only have about 5 minutes, but if this sparked any questions in you or anything at all that you have a question about, I'm here for it in these last 5 minutes.
The song was If the World Was Ending, You'd Come Over, right? Um, I forgot who it's by, but and we would
Yeah.
just be together. You all know the song. It's a popular song playing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And it's like, who would you go to? Or would you
Yeah.
just spend it with yourself? Would it be
Right.
like the Last Supper? Would it,
Mm-hmm.
we'd put everything aside and it
I
just made me
know.
think about the the invitation to write for
Right.
tomorrow.
Right. And that's, I think, wrapped up in the Aubade form, right? Is I guess, the clarity, the paradigmatic shift of clarity, of light, of an ending that heralds some kind of new beginning of the dawn, right? Whether that be a literal dawn or an existential, conceptual dawn. Like that's how do you act, right?
Mhm.
Within that shift. Absolutely. Any other thoughts or questions?
I don't have a direct question, but you said something
Sure.
about teaching poetry or questions about teaching poetry, and I thought, oh,
Sure.
that's interesting. So I did think of doing an MFA and maybe teaching, but I'm actually older, so I don't know if it's like too late to do it. I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about, so I don't have a direct question.
Yeah. I mean, you know, speaking of paradigmatic shifts, it's never too late. I will say that. It's never too late. I would invite you to think about what animates your impulse to do an MFA. Like, is it more, to do teaching at the end of it? Which unfortunately in this culture is not, in this job market is not guaranteed by any means. But if it's to procure community, to engage in workshops, to engage in thinking about writing with other writers, um, I would say yes on that. And depending on the logistics, there's a number of programs that are funded, for example, that you wouldn't have to bleed money into in order to attend. So that's, my unofficial advice is to plumb the reasons why you'd want to pursue one.
Yeah.
And
I'd
again,
love to do it for the interest, but I'm
right.
afraid like if I do it, I guess like the amount of time I took would be like I don't get work out of the end, so that makes me worried. But I
Yeah,
would love to do it for the sake of doing it.
right. The beauty of something like that, and I say this in with a heavy grain of salt because I actually never did an MFA. But I have I'm very overeducated in other ways, but it was more scholarly and thinking about poems in a scholarly sense. But one thing I do guarantee you will come away with is that it's a structured force of your hand to produce work. So you will have a body of work at the end of these. It's required to graduate, right? So if that's the interest, then that will happen. Um, but in terms of, again, it gets trickier if it's towards a career professional goal like teaching at a university. That's getting increasingly difficult. So I have to be real about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, my
All
pleasure.
right.
Any
Just a little
No
outro
worries.
here.
Yes,
We
thank
want to
you.
thank our sponsors for our opportunities, such as these virtual workshops and other free events that we offer during this month of April. And also, if any of you would like, we have this closing ceremony at the end of the month on April 26th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. It's an opportunity for you guys to be able to share your poems with other people who have taken other free virtual workshops this month. It's not required, but I assure you it will be very fun and it's a great opportunity to share your work in a safe and creative environment. And you can register for it at jackspoetryfest.org/2026 schedule. Also, if you guys would give us feedback, we love trying to do better every single year, and we love to hear what you guys take away from these workshops and other free events.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a great workshop.
Thank you. Take care, you all.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.